Avalon Mercer, 32, sat frozen at the family dinner table as the words hung in the air like poison. "You're not part of this family," her father had announced, his voice devoid of emotion. 20 years of memories suddenly felt like elaborate lies. What Avalon discovered next would not only shatter her identity but would set in motion a chain of events that would bring an entire family empire crumbling down. Sometimes blood isn't thicker than water, it's just the first thing to spill. Before I continue this story that changed my life forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy real-life family drama with unexpected twists. Trust me, what happened after this dinner conversation will make you question everything about family loyalty. For all 32 years of my life, the Mercer family had been the embodiment of American success. My father, Richard Mercer, had built a luxury real estate empire from nothing, transforming the skylines of 3 major cities with his signature glass and steel towers. My mother, Eleanor, was the perfect corporate wife. Charity galas, political fundraisers, and country club memberships filled her calendar. My older brother Ethan had followed in my father's footsteps, becoming the heir apparent to Mercer Developments. And then there was me, Avalon, named after my father's first successful property development. Growing up in our Connecticut mansion, I had everything a child could want materially, but something always felt slightly off. While Ethan received my father's undivided attention and mentorship, I was constantly redirected toward more suitable pursuits for a Mercer daughter: art history, social graces, and eventually public relations. "You'll be the face of the family's charitable foundation," my mother would say, patting my hand dismissively whenever I expressed interest in the actual business. Despite this, I excelled academically, graduating summa cum laude from Yale, with a double major in business and urban planning. Rather than joining the family business immediately, I spent 5 years working for a competitor, learning the industry from the ground up. When I finally returned to Mercer Developments at 27, I came armed with fresh ideas and innovations that could modernize our approach. The sustainable community-oriented development plan I created won industry awards and brought positive press to our company. Yet no matter my accomplishments, family dinners remained tense affairs. My father would quiz Ethan extensively about ongoing projects while barely acknowledging my contributions. My mother would interject with stories about her friends' daughters who had settled down nicely with appropriate husbands. Ethan himself had grown increasingly cold toward me as my professional reputation grew independently of the Mercer name. Last month, I discovered financial irregularities in the company's books, specifically in projects directly overseen by Ethan. Environmental impact statements had been falsified, safety regulations circumvented, and local officials bribed to fast-track permits. When I discreetly approached my father with my concerns, he brushed them aside. "This is how business is done, Avalon. If you can't handle it, perhaps you're in the wrong industry." The tension had been building for weeks, culminating in that fateful Sunday dinner. I'd arrived early to help my mother in the kitchen, something I always did, despite her insistence that the staff could handle everything. I overheard a heated discussion between my parents in the study, but couldn't make out the words. When dinner was served, everyone seemed on edge. My father barely touched his food, my mother drank more wine than usual, and Ethan kept checking his phone nervously. After dessert, as the staff cleared the dishes, my father cleared his throat and looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. "Avalon, there's something your mother and I have been meaning to tell you for some time," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "It's about your place in this family." I remember thinking he was finally going to acknowledge my contributions to the company, perhaps even offer me the partnership I had earned through years of dedicated work. Instead, his next words would forever change how I viewed not just my family but my entire identity and purpose in life. What I didn't realize then was that the bombshell he was about to drop was merely the first domino in a sequence that would expose decades of deception, reveal unlikely allies, and ultimately force me to choose between the family name I'd spent my life trying to honor and the moral compass I'd always followed, despite their influence. "You're not part of this family, not biologically," my father continued, his voice flat and businesslike, as if discussing a minor contractual issue rather than demolishing my entire sense of self. "Eleanor couldn't have children after Ethan. You were adopted." The chandelier light suddenly seemed too bright, the dining room too small. My mother stared intently at her wineglass, refusing to meet my eyes. Ethan had the audacity to look almost smug. "We never told you because it didn't seem important," my father continued. "We gave you the Mercer name, the Mercer education, the Mercer lifestyle, but recent developments that have made it necessary to clarify matters." Those developments, as it turned out, concerned the future of Mercer Developments. My father was preparing to announce his retirement, and with it the transition of company leadership. What should have been a straightforward succession plan had apparently been complicated by my recent discoveries and growing influence within the company. "Ethan will be taking over as CEO," my father stated. "You will be offered a generous severance package and asked to sign an NDA regarding your time with the company." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the double betrayal. Not only was I learning that my entire family history was a fabrication, but I was also being systematically removed from the company I had helped strengthen and modernize. "Who are my biological parents?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother spoke for the first time, her words slurring slightly from the wine. "It was a closed adoption, darling. Very clean, very proper. A teenage girl from somewhere upstate, unwed of course. We were told she died a few years later, car accident or something similarly tragic." The casual dismissal of my birth mother's life hit me like a physical blow. I pushed back from the table, needing space, needing air. "And you're telling me this now because Ethan interjected, "the board requires unanimous family approval for the succession plan. As a non-blood relative, your vote can be legally bypassed if necessary. We're just trying to avoid any unpleasantness." The calculated timing became clear. This wasn't about honesty or my right to know my origins. This was about power control and removing an obstacle. The adoption revelation was simply their leverage to force me out quietly. "I need time to process this," I said, standing on shaky legs. Neither of my parents moved to comfort me. Ethan checked his watch impatiently. "The paperwork will be ready on Monday," my father said. "I expect you to do the right thing, Avalon. We've given you everything. Don't forget that." I left without another word, driving aimlessly through the night, my mind racing. Everything I thought I knew about myself had been a carefully constructed lie. Every childhood memory was now tinged with deception. Even my name, Avalon Mercer, felt like a costume I'd been unwittingly wearing. Back at my apartment, I pulled out old photo albums, searching for clues I might have missed. There were inexplicably few baby pictures of me, compared to the extensive documentation of Ethan's early years. In the photos that did exist, my mother always looked slightly rigid when holding me, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. As dawn broke, I made a decision. If I wasn't truly a Mercer by blood, perhaps I didn't need to play by Mercer rules any longer. I wouldn't sign their papers or quietly disappear. First, I would discover the truth about my origins, all of it. Then I would decide what to do about the corruption I'd uncovered. What I didn't realize then was that my search for identity would unearth secrets far darker than financial impropriety, secrets that would explain why I'd always been kept at arm's length, why my achievements were minimized, and why, despite giving me everything the Mercers had always ensured, I understood I was somehow less than them. Little did I know that the path to these answers would lead me to unlikely allies, unexpected connections, and ultimately, a choice between the vengeance I craved and the justice the situation demanded. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Instead of going to the Mercer Development's headquarters as expected, I called in sick, probably my first in 5 years with the company. Then I made 3 important calls to a private investigator specializing in adoption cases, to a forensic accountant I'd met at an industry conference, and to my personal attorney to ensure my legal standing. The Mercers had made one critical mistake in their calculated revelation. They'd assumed I would be too emotionally devastated to think strategically. They didn't realize that years of subtle exclusion had prepared me for this moment, had hardened something in me that could now serve as armor. Within hours, I had secured my personal files and documents from my office through a trusted assistant. By afternoon, I had established a secure email account and communication system separate from anything the Mercers could monitor. By evening, I had moved from my apartment purchased with Mercer money to a hotel under an assumed name. The private investigator, a former police detective named Margot Sanchez, met me in a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant. Closed adoptions from that era can be challenging but not impossible, she explained, reviewing the scant information I had. The good news is that Connecticut keeps better records than most states. The bad news is that powerful families like yours often have ways of obscuring paper trails. They're not my family, I corrected her automatically, surprising myself with how quickly I'd mentally severed the connection. Margot gave me a knowing look. That realization will serve you well. Emotional detachment is crucial for this kind of investigation. For the next 2 weeks, I maintained minimal contact with the Mercers, citing a need for personal time to process everything. My father sent increasingly impatient messages about the severance paperwork. My mother left tearful voicemails insisting they had only done what was best for me. Ethan remained notably silent. Meanwhile, the forensic accountant confirmed my suspicions about the company's financial improprieties, but uncovered something even more disturbing: a pattern of harassment settlements paid to female employees who had worked directly with Ethan over the years. The amounts were substantial, the documentation deliberately obscured in the company records. As for my adoption, Margot's investigation hit several suspicious dead ends. Records that should exist have been expunged, she reported during our third meeting. Someone went to considerable trouble to erase your paper trail. The Mercers have influence, I said, not entirely surprised. This goes beyond normal influence, Margot replied, her expression grave. I've worked cases involving wealthy families before. Usually, there's still something to find: a court record, a hospital birth certificate, something. In your case, it's as if someone took a scalpel to the archives. Just as we were considering more drastic investigative measures, Margot received an anonymous email. The sender claimed to have information about my adoption, but would only speak to me personally. A meeting was arranged at a small coffee shop in New Haven, far from Mercer territory. The woman who approached my table was in her 70s with silver hair and alert eyes that studied me carefully before she sat down. You look like her, she said without preamble. Around the eyes especially. You knew my birth mother, I asked, my heart suddenly racing. I was the nurse on duty the night you were born, she replied. I've been following your career in the business pages for years. When I saw you'd joined Mercer Developments, I nearly reached out then, but… She hesitated. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of Richard Mercer, she said, simply. He made it very clear what would happen to anyone who ever spoke about your birth. She proceeded to tell me a story so shocking that had it come from anyone else, I might not have believed it. My birth mother hadn't been some anonymous teenager as Eleanor had claimed. She had been Amanda Whitman, the daughter of Richard's former business partner James Whitman. James and Richard built the first Mercer building together, the nurse explained. But Richard wanted to expand faster, take more risks. When James refused, there was a falling out. James died in what was ruled an accident at a construction site just months later. His daughter Amanda inherited his shares in the company. Amanda, barely 21, and grieving her father, had trusted Richard to guide her through the complex business matters. That trust had been her downfall. She and Richard became involved, the nurse continued. When she became pregnant, he promised to leave Eleanor and marry her. Instead, he systematically stripped her of her shares through legal maneuvering. When you were born, he took you immediately. Amanda was told you had died during birth. I felt physically ill as the nurse continued. Amanda had spiraled into depression after losing both her father and her baby. When she eventually discovered that Richard had lied about my death, she threatened to expose him. 3 days later, she died in what was ruled a suicide. I never believed it was suicide, the nurse said firmly. Neither did some of the police officers involved, but the Mercer influence ran deep even then. As she finished her story, she slid a yellowed envelope across the table. Amanda left this with me just in case. She said she had a feeling something might happen to her. I've kept it all these years waiting for the right time. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to my beloved daughter and a small safety deposit box key. There's one more thing you should know, the nurse said as she stood to leave. Amanda named you before they took you away. She called you Justice. I know this story is getting intense, and I'm about to share what I found in that safety deposit box that changed everything. Before I continue, I'd love to know if any of you have ever discovered a family secret that completely changed your perspective on your childhood. Drop a comment below. And if you're finding this journey as shocking as I did living through it, please hit that like button to help others find this story. Now let me tell you what happened when I opened that safety deposit box. The contents of the safety deposit box were like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was trying to solve my entire life. Inside was a detailed journal kept by my birth mother, Amanda Whitman, documenting her relationship with Richard Mercer and her suspicions about her father's accident. There were original partnership agreements between James Whitman and Richard, showing that Whitman had actually provided most of the initial capital for what became Mercer Developments. Most damning of all was a USB drive containing scanned copies of letters between Richard and his lawyer discussing how to handle the Whitman situation, both before and after James Whitman's death. I spent 3 days in my hotel room, barely eating or sleeping, absorbing the truth of my origins. I wasn't just adopted, I was the rightful heir to half of what was now the Mercer fortune. My grandfather had been murdered, my mother manipulated, and quite possibly murdered as well, and I had been stolen and raised by the very people responsible, kept close but never too close, given opportunities but never true power. The revelation transformed my hurt into something harder, more focused. This wasn't just about me being pushed out of a company job, this was about justice delayed for decades. I contacted Margot with my discoveries, and she connected me with a former prosecutor who specialized in cold cases. The statute of limitations has expired on some of these matters, he warned, after reviewing the materials, but not all. Corporate fraud has different parameters, and if we can establish an ongoing conspiracy, it opens more legal avenues. Meanwhile, the Mercers had moved from impatience to concern about my continued absence. My father called repeatedly, his messages shifting from commanding to cajoling. Whatever you think you know, there's always another side to the story, Avalon, he said in his latest voicemail. Come home. Let's talk like family. Family. The word now felt like ashes in my mouth. My investigation took an unexpected turn when I was contacted by Sandra Chen, Mercer Developments' longtime general counsel, who had recently retired. I've been wanting to speak with you for some time, she said, when we met at her home outside the city. Your questions about the financial irregularities set off alarm bells with the board. Richard assured them you were being dealt with, which concerned me greatly. Sandra revealed that she had kept her own records of questionable decisions over the years, not enough to implicate herself, but sufficient to establish a pattern. I always suspected Richard was hiding something significant from his early days with the company, something that gave Eleanor unusual leverage over him. When you started asking questions, the panic was palpable. With Sandra's guidance, I began reaching out to other former employees who might have information. Some refused to speak with me clearly, still fearful of Mercer retribution. Others shared pieces of the puzzle. An administrative assistant who had witnessed Richard shredding documents after a visit from a woman she now realized must have been Amanda. A former site manager who confirmed that the safety protocols at the construction site where my grandfather died had been deliberately compromised. Most surprising was the email I received from my Aunt Catherine Eleanor's younger sister, whom I'd always known as the family black sheep. Living in Europe for as long as I could remember, she rarely attended family functions and was spoken of with thinly veiled disapproval. "I've been waiting for this day," she wrote. "Eleanor swore me to silence years ago, threatened to destroy me financially if I ever told you the truth. But I've kept records, Avalon. Records of conversations of hush money paid to keep me away from family gatherings where I might let something slip. I'm on the first flight back. We need to talk." Catherine arrived 2 days later, bringing with her recordings of conversations with Eleanor dating back nearly 20 years. In one particularly damning exchange, my mother could be heard clearly saying, "Richard insists we keep her close where we can watch her. I'd rather have sent her away to boarding school permanently, but he's afraid of what might emerge if she starts asking questions about her background." "They never loved you," Catherine told me bluntly over dinner. "But they feared what you represented, living proof of Richard's greatest sins." Eleanor agreed to the arrangement because it gave her absolute power in the marriage. Richard would never dare cross her knowing she could expose him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. Catherine's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I tried in my way. Those books I sent you every birthday about strong women seeking truth, the college recommendation that got you away from them for 4 years. I did what I could without putting you in danger before you were ready." Danger. From my own parents, Richard Mercer has eliminated everyone who threatened his carefully constructed narrative, Catherine said grimly. "Your mother. Your grandfather. At least 2 journalists who started asking questions in the early days. I believe the only reason I was spared is because eliminating Eleanor's sister would have raised too many questions. The pieces were aligning in a terrifying pattern. My entire life had been spent under the roof of people capable of murder, to protect their secrets and their fortune, a fortune that had never truly been theirs. With my team of unlikely allies growing, Margot, Sandra, Catherine, and several former employees willing to testify, I began constructing a case that could be taken to authorities. But I needed more concrete evidence linking Richard directly to the deaths, something that would overcome the decades that had passed, and the statute of limitations on some of the financial crimes. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Ethan's executive assistant Lydia contacted me through a secure channel Margot had established. "Mr. Ethan has been behaving erratically since you disappeared," she wrote. "Shredding documents, making late-night calls, drinking heavily in his office. Yesterday I overheard him arguing with your father about the Amanda situation resurfacing. He said something about the cabin, and evidence that should have been destroyed years ago. The cabin, my father's hunting retreat in the Adirondacks, a place where women were pointedly never invited. I'd been there exactly once as a child, when plans had changed unexpectedly, and there hadn't been time to drop me off with a nanny. I remembered being prohibited from entering certain rooms, my father's unusual tension during the entire brief stay. We need to get into that cabin," Margot said when I shared Lydia's information. "But it's certainly under surveillance, and Mercer Security doesn't mess around. I can get us in," Catherine said confidently. "Richard would never think to change the security protocols to exclude me. I was the one who helped set them up originally, back when Eleanor and I were still speaking regularly." 2 days later, Catherine, Margot, and I made the journey to the cabin, timing our arrival during a major Mercer Foundation gala that would ensure Richard and Eleanor were publicly occupied. What we discovered in a hidden safe behind the hunting trophies would finally give me the leverage I needed to reclaim my birthright and bring the Mercers to justice. You won't believe what we found hidden in that cabin. This journey has been more shocking than I ever imagined, and I'm so grateful you're following along. If you're finding value in my story, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel, and you'll be notified when I share more real-life family drama stories. Now let me tell you about the evidence that would finally bring down the Mercer Empire. Armed with irrefutable evidence from the cabin, including Richard's handwritten notes about arranging my grandfather's accident photos, documenting his affair with my birth mother, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation between Richard and Eleanor discussing Amanda's unfortunate but necessary death, I was ready to confront the people who had stolen my life. Rather than going to the authorities immediately, I decided on a different approach, one that would force the Mercers to face me and their crimes directly. I reached out to Richard's executive assistant, requesting a private family dinner to discuss the terms of my departure from the company. The request was specific, just Richard, Eleanor, Ethan, and me. No staff present during the meal. The response came within minutes. Dinner was set for the following evening at the family home. Richard, his assistant noted, was relieved at my sensible decision. I spent the day with my team finalizing our strategy. Sandra helped prepare the legal documents that would be served immediately after the confrontation. Margot arranged for security personnel, former military specialists, to be stationed discreetly around the property. Catherine provided invaluable insights into Richard and Eleanor's psychological weaknesses. Eleanor's greatest fear has always been public humiliation, she explained. Richard fears losing control above all else. Use that. I arrived at the mansion exactly on time, dressed impeccably in a cream suit that subtly echoed one worn by Amanda in photos I'd discovered. The symbolism wouldn't be lost on Richard if he was paying attention. Eleanor greeted me at the door with artificial warmth, air kissing near my cheeks. "Darling, we've been so worried. Your father has barely slept." My father. The phrase no longer held meaning. Richard waited in the dining room, tumbler of scotch already in hand. Ethan stood by the window, tension evident in his posture. "Avalon," Richard said, gesturing to my usual seat. "I'm glad you've come to your senses. The paperwork is ready as discussed." "I'm not here to sign anything," I replied calmly, remaining standing. "I'm here to give you one opportunity to do the right thing after decades of doing the wrong thing." Richard's expression hardened. "If you're here to make demands about your position, I'm here about Amanda Whitman," I interrupted, watching the color drain from his face. "And James Whitman. And the company that was built with Whitman money, ingenuity, and ultimately, Whitman blood." Eleanor's glass of wine froze halfway to her lips. Ethan turned from the window, confusion crossing his features. "That's ancient history," Richard said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Whatever you think you know, I know everything." I stated, placing a USB drive on the table. "Every detail of how you orchestrated my grandfather's accident. How you manipulated my mother, impregnated her, then stole her shares while she was vulnerable. How you took me from her and told her I had died. And most damning of all, how you silenced her permanently when she discovered I was alive." "These are ridiculous accusations," Eleanor interjected, her voice shrill. "Richard would never. You were complicit." I cut her off. "The recordings make that quite clear. You agreed to raise your husband's illegitimate child as leverage over him, ensuring your position and comfort would never be threatened." Ethan looked between his parents, genuine shock registering on his face. "What is she talking about?" "Dad." Richard remained silent, calculating, his eyes never leaving the USB drive. "Here's what happens now," I continued. "Option 1. You sign the documents my attorney will deliver tomorrow, transferring 50% ownership of Mercer Developments, or should I say Whitman Mercer Developments, to me, as is my birthright, as James Whitman's only grandchild and Amanda Whitman's daughter. You both resign from the board. Ethan stays on in a diminished capacity, provided forensic accounting confirms he wasn't involved in the original crimes. And option 2, Richard asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Every journalist, prosecutor, and competitor you've ever made receives copies of everything on this drive. I've arranged for dead man's switches. If anything happens to me, the information goes public instantly. Your legacy becomes one of murder, theft, and decades of conspiracy. Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound. You expect us to believe you'd destroy this family's reputation? Your own name would be dragged through the mud. My name isn't Mercer, I replied. It never truly was. My mother named me Justice before you stole me from her. Fitting, don't you think? The impact of my words hung in the air. Richard's hand tightened around his glass until I thought it might shatter. You're bluffing, he finally said. You always were soft-hearted. You don't have the stomach to destroy everything. In response, I took out my phone and played a short clip of the recording from the cabin, his own voice discussing the need to handle Amanda permanently. Eleanor gasped. Ethan stepped away from his father, as if physically repelled. I've spent my entire life trying to earn the approval of people who murdered my real parents, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. People who kept me close only to monitor me, who gave me opportunities only to control me. I have nothing to lose, Richard. You've made sure of that. We gave you everything, Eleanor hissed. Education opportunities, connections. You gave me scraps from a table that should have been half mine by birthright, I corrected her. And now I'm taking what's mine. Richard stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. For a moment I thought he might become physically threatening, but Ethan stepped between us. Dad, what have you done? He demanded, his voice shaking. Is this true? Did you kill someone? The momentary confusion gave me the opportunity to play my final card. The authorities already have copies of everything, I informed them. This dinner isn't a negotiation, it's a courtesy. The only question is whether you cooperate and maintain some dignity, or fight and lose everything. Richard's expression changed then from anger to something I'd never seen on his face before, fear. You're more like me than you know, he said quietly. No, I replied. I'm giving you a chance to make amends. That's something you never would have done. As I turned to leave, Ethan followed me to the door. I didn't know, he insisted, about any of this. There will be a full investigation, I told him. If you're telling the truth, you'll have a place in the company's future. If not, I left the sentence unfinished, walking out of the mansion that had never truly been my home. Outside, Catherine waited in the car. How did they take it? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Exactly as you predicted, I replied. Richard tried to intimidate me, Eleanor appealed to guilt, and Ethan claimed ignorance. And now, we wait to see if they're smart enough to take the deal. Either way, the Mercer Empire as it existed ends tonight. What I didn't tell Catherine was the moment of doubt I'd experienced looking into Richard's eyes, seeing something of myself reflected there. The single question that had haunted me throughout this process in pursuing justice so relentlessly, was I becoming like the man who had orchestrated so much suffering? The answer would come in how I handled the power I was about to reclaim. Whether I used it to heal or to further damage. As we drove away from the mansion, I made a silent promise to Amanda and James Whitman that their legacy would finally be used for good. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings, press statements, and corporate restructuring. Richard and Eleanor, recognizing the inevitability of their downfall, ultimately accepted my terms rather than face public prosecution. The official story released to the media was deliberately vague, citing irregularities discovered in the company's founding documents, and a mutual agreement to restructure ownership, recognizing historical contributions. Behind closed doors, the reality was far more severe. Richard and Eleanor were forced to resign from all company positions and relinquish control of the Mercer Foundation. They retreated to their home in the Cayman Islands, effectively exiled from the society that had once revered them. Legally bound by non-disclosure agreements, they could never tell their side of the story, not that any version they might offer would justify their actions. Ethan's position proved more complicated. Forensic accounting confirmed he had indeed engaged in financial improprieties, though there was no evidence linking him to the original crimes against my birth family. After lengthy deliberation, I offered him a choice: resign completely or accept a demotion to regional manager of our smallest division with strict oversight and ethics training. To my surprise, he chose the latter. "I want to earn my place legitimately," he told me, during an uncomfortable meeting in what was now my office. "I've spent my entire career believing I was entitled to success because of who my father was. I need to learn who I am without that crutch." His humility seemed genuine, though only time would tell if it was lasting. I assigned Sandra Chen, now rehired as our ethical compliance officer, to monitor his division closely. The company itself underwent a complete transformation. Mercer Developments became Whitman Enterprises, with a new mission statement focusing on sustainable, community-oriented projects. I established a requirement that 30% of our developments include affordable housing components. The exploitative practices that had characterized Richard's leadership were systematically identified and eliminated. Perhaps most meaningful to me personally was the Amanda Whitman Foundation, which I established using a significant portion of my newly acquired wealth. The foundation provided support for victims of domestic violence and financial abuse, along with scholarships for young women pursuing careers in architecture, construction, and urban planning, the path my mother had never been able to follow. Throughout this period of transformation, I also underwent personal changes. With Catherine's help, I connected with distant relatives from the Whitman side of my family, discovering cousins I never knew existed. Though these relationships were new and sometimes awkward, they provided a sense of belonging I had never experienced with the Mercers. I also began using my birth name professionally, Justice Whitman, though I maintained Avalon as my middle name, a reminder of the journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months after the confrontation dinner, I received an unexpected visit from Lydia, Ethan's former assistant. She had left Mercer Developments shortly after my takeover, and I had assumed she remained loyal to the old guard. "I have something you should see," she said, placing a leather-bound journal on my desk. "Ethan asked me to destroy this years ago. I never did." The journal contained detailed accounts of conversations between Richard and Eleanor dating back 15 years, conversations Ethan had secretly recorded and transcribed, apparently building his own insurance policy against his parents' potential betrayal. "He's not as innocent as he's pretending to be," Lydia explained. "He may not have known about the original crimes, but he suspected something was deeply wrong, and chose to protect himself rather than investigate." The revelation forced another difficult decision. After reviewing the journal thoroughly, I called Ethan to my office and presented him with his own words. "You knew something was wrong," I said. "You didn't know exactly what, but you knew enough to start documenting their behavior. Why didn't you dig deeper?" His face paled as he recognized the journal. "I was afraid," he admitted after a long silence. "Afraid of what I might find. Afraid of losing everything if I challenged them. It was easier to look away and focus on my own advancement." "That ends now," I told him. "Complete transparency going forward, or you're out entirely. No more secrets in this company." To his credit, Ethan agreed to additional oversight and a probationary period. Whether this represented genuine growth or merely self-preservation remained to be seen, but I was determined to build a company culture where ethical concerns couldn't be swept aside for convenience or profit. As the 1-year anniversary of my discovery approached, I found myself reflecting on the path that had led me here. The pain of betrayal had not entirely faded, nor had the grief for the parents I'd never truly known. But alongside these emotions had grown something else, a sense of purpose and identity, untethered from the Mercer legacy of deception. In honoring Amanda and James Whitman through my actions, I was creating a new legacy, one built on transparency, ethical business practices, and genuine community investment. The company's profits had initially dipped as we implemented these changes, but were now rebounding as our reputation for integrity attracted partners who shared our values. I kept Amanda's journal and photographs in my office, a daily reminder of why this transformation mattered. Sometimes, in quiet moments between meetings, I would speak to her silently, updating her on the changes being made in her name, hoping that somewhere, somehow, she knew that justice had finally been served. What I could never have anticipated was how this journey would continue to unfold, or the final revelation that would come from an unexpected source, a revelation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about forgiveness and redemption. 1 year to the day after the family dinner that changed everything, I received a letter postmarked from a small town in Maine. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting, elegant, slightly shaky, triggered a distant memory. Inside was a single page of stationery and a small key. Justice. The letter began using my birth name. If you're reading this, you've discovered the truth I could never tell you face to face. There is one final piece to your mother's story that you deserve to know. The enclosed key opens a storage unit in Portland. What you find there may offer some measure of peace. With sincere regret and hope for your future, Catherine. Catherine had disappeared 3 months earlier, leaving only a brief note, saying she needed time away. Her letter now made the reason clear: she had been preparing this final revelation. 2 days later, I stood before a nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of Portland. The unit was small, containing only a weatherproof trunk and a file box. Inside the trunk were preserved mementos of Amanda Whitman's life, her college diploma, childhood photographs, artwork, and journals beyond what I had already discovered. The file box, however, contained the true shock medical records, indicating that Amanda Whitman had not in fact died 28 years ago. According to the documents, she had survived what appeared to be a suicide attempt but suffered severe memory loss and psychological trauma. Catherine, my Aunt Eleanor's sister, had secretly arranged for her care at a private facility, using her own funds to ensure Amanda received treatment away from Richard's influence. A recent photograph showed an older woman with my eyes and smile, sitting in a garden at a coastal rehabilitation center. On the back was written, "She remembers pieces now. Your name is one of them." The revelation left me breathless. My mother, my birth mother, was alive. A letter from Catherine explained the final piece. After your confrontation with the Mercers, I struggled with whether to tell you this truth. Amanda's recovery has been slow and fragile. The doctors weren't certain how either of you would handle such an emotional reunion. But as her memories continue to return, her desire to know about you has grown stronger. The choice to proceed is now yours, Justice. She is ready to meet her daughter if you are ready to meet her. The address of the care facility was included along with the name of Amanda's primary physician. I sat in my rental car for hours, processing this information, weighing the potential joy against the pain such a meeting might resurrect for both of us. Eventually, I started the engine and began the drive along the coast. The facility was beautiful, more resort than hospital, with expansive gardens and a view of the Atlantic. Amanda's doctor met me first, explaining her condition, the progress she had made, and setting expectations for our reunion. She has good days and difficult days, he cautioned. Today is one of her stronger days, but please understand that her memories remain fragmented. Your patience will be essential. He led me to a sunroom overlooking the water. Seated in a wicker chair gazing out at the waves was the woman from the photograph, my mother. She turned as we entered, and for a moment I saw confusion in her eyes, followed by a flash of recognition so profound it brought tears to my eyes. "Justice," she said softly, the name an uncertain question. I nodded, unable to speak, past the emotion tightening my throat. "My daughter," she whispered, reaching out tentatively. "They told me you had died. Then they told me I was confused. For years I believed them. But I kept dreaming of a baby girl. I named her Justice, because that's what I wanted for my father, for myself." I took her outstretched hand, feeling the connection that transcended the years of separation. "I found you," I managed to say. "I found the truth." Our conversation that day was gentle, careful, both of us navigating uncharted emotional territory. She remembered some things with crystal clarity: my grandfather's laugh, the feel of holding me as a newborn, the betrayal in Richard's eyes when she confronted him. Other memories remained shrouded, protecting her from the full trauma of what she had endured. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the sunroom floor, Amanda squeezed my hand. "Catherine told me what you did, reclaiming the company, renaming it for my father. He would be so proud. And so am I." Those words, the maternal pride I had unconsciously sought my entire life, washed over me like a healing balm. In the months that followed, I visited Amanda regularly. Each visit strengthened our bond and helped recover more pieces of her memory. The doctors believed that having a purpose, getting to know her daughter, had accelerated her healing process. With Amanda's blessing, I established a trust in her name, ensuring she would always receive the best care, while protecting her from any potential retaliation from Richard. Though the legal agreements technically prevented him from approaching either of us, I had learned never to underestimate the lengths to which desperate people might go. Ethan surprisingly asked to accompany me on one of my visits to meet Amanda. "I need to understand the full impact of what my family did," he explained. Though initially reluctant, I eventually agreed, seeing it as an opportunity for him to fully comprehend the human cost of the Mercer legacy. The meeting was brief but profound. Amanda showed no anger toward Ethan, only a calm assessment that seemed to affect him more deeply than rage could have. "You have a chance to be better than your parents," she told him. "Justice is giving you that opportunity. Don't waste it." As for Eleanor and Richard, they remained in exile, their carefully constructed social empire in ruins. Occasional reports reached me of Richard's declining health, but I felt nothing, neither satisfaction nor pity. They had made their choices across decades of deliberate cruelty. Justice had been served not through vengeance but through truth and the reclamation of what had been stolen. Today, Whitman Enterprises stands as a testament to what ethical business practices can achieve. The Amanda Whitman Foundation has helped hundreds of women escape abusive situations and pursue their educational dreams. And I, Justice Avalon Whitman, have finally found the sense of belonging that eluded me throughout my years as a Mercer. The family dinner that began this journey was meant to exclude me from a family that had never truly been mine. Instead, it set me on a path to discover my real family, my true identity, and the strength I never knew I possessed. Sometimes rejection is merely redirection to where you truly belong. I want to thank all of you for following this intensely personal story. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or discovered that your life wasn't what you thought it was, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. Your support through likes and shares helps others find stories of resilience and justice like mine. Please subscribe for more real-life family dramas and lessons about standing up for truth, even when it's difficult. Remember, sometimes what feels like the end of your story is actually just the beginning of a better one. Thank you for being part of my journey to justice.